I think for our next sewing project we're going to make a shift, also known as a chemise. They were typically made out of very lightweight white linen, and they were sewn together with lightweight white linen thread. And the shift that we're going to be making incorporates a lot of various techniques, from flat felling to stroke gathering to making buttonholes to hemming. And we're going to be making 2 gusseted sleeves, which might be new to you. A gusseted sleeve is a great idea, but you typically only see it on women's shifts and men's shirts. Now, the woman's shift is the innermost garment against the skin. It's basically her underwear. And a man's shirt is the exact same thing. It is the innermost garment against the skin. It is also his underwear. The shift protects her clothing from her skin. And it's very important that you have a number of shifts. I myself wear shifts every single day of the week, and I've probably got 4 or 5 of them. And Danielle has a number of shifts also. In the old days, you would have seen somebody's inventory as having upwards of 10 to 15 shifts. And you would probably only wear for one day, just like in modern days you would only wear your modern underwear for one day. So this next project is going to be a shift, and it's going to be a shift for Danielle. Now we're going to make one departure from the shift, and that is we're going to use a fabric. It's going to be lightweight linen, but it's going to have a very subtle stripe to it. I picked up the fabric because I liked it. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with it. And then when Danielle posed the idea that she needed a new shift, we thought, why don't we use this fabric? Do you like it? And she said that she did like it. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to make Danielle a new shift using this very interesting white linen fabric. So let's get started. This is one of my shifts. In fact, it's the last shift that I made for myself. A couple of interesting things that we'll show you. For one thing, it's got my initials cross-stitched into it. When you have a household of people who wear shifts, it's nice to have initials on yours so that once the laundry's been done, it's easier to sort things out. And another thing we do is we cross-stitch the date that we made our garment. Just about all of our hand-sewn garments have a date cross-stitched into them. This is the sleeve, and this is the sleeve gusset. So these are what they refer to as gusseted sleeves. It's got a stroke gather where the sleeve attaches to the body, up and around, and coming back down to the gusset again on the other side. It's on the wrists. We've got a stroke gather on the wrist, all the way around. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's a strap on the inside of the garment that covers the seam allowance, the sleeve's seam allowance. That's how we handle that, by making a little strap. And if you can see it, here it is on the inside. At the hem area, the shift has 4 gores, which are basically triangles. So the triangle would be down the middle, over to the side, and then up again. That's 1. And then there's 1 over here. That's 2. And 2 on the other side. When we get to sewing and constructing, the gores will be the first things that we put on. The neckline is just a scooped neckline on the woman's shift with just a turned over hem. You have to get your neckline just perfect because it's easy to make them too wide. If you make your neckline too wide, you'll find your shift sliding off your shoulder. under your clothes. So we think we've come up with a technique to get that neckline just right. It's difficult to show you how to cut it out when the fabric is on the table because there's a lot of detailing. So I've made this drawing of all the pieces that we're going to use. You need about 2 3/4 yards of fabric to begin with. Now, the total length of the body of the shift is about 92 inches. Now I say about because that's what we make ours. You might want to make yours, you can adjust the size for you. So 92 inches from one hem up and over the shoulders down to the other hem. 92 inches. Then for the width from one side to the other, you're going to make that 32 inches at the bottom where the hem is. From that point, you're going to measure up from the bottom where the hem is. On one side, you're going to measure up 19.5 inches and make a mark there on both sides. And you'll do it again on the other side. We'll call this the front side and this the back side. Now you're going to need to make 4 triangles that are 5 inches wide, 19.5 inches tall, and then you're going to, it's a right triangle, meaning this is a 90-degree angle. After you've met those 2 dimensions, you're going to draw a line down this way. So that's your triangle. You need to cut 4 of those out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are going to be your gores. Now at the neckline, you've got your 32-inch wide fabric coming up. So right at the center of the shoulder, you want to mark that. You can mark it with a pin. I like to use an off-color thread because it'll stay there. If you put a thread in there and tie it, it'll stay there on both sides, which shows where the center of the shoulder is. So you want to measure, you want to go all the way up to that center of the shoulder, and on that side line you want to measure in 6 1/4 inches. So from the outside edge of the fabric you want to measure in 6 1/4 inches and make a mark. Now you've measured up 19.5 inches. From that point to this mark here, that's 6 1/4, you're going to draw that angle line. That's your cut line. It's very confusing. If you have any problems, leave a comment or get in touch with me. So let's just review. The gores, you need 4 of them. They're 19.5 inches tall. They're 5 inches wide. And it's a right triangle, meaning this angle here is 90 degrees. And then you just connect these 2 dots. You need 4 of these. This is your wrist or your cuff. And the cuff needs to be 11 inches long and 1.5 inches wide. You need to make 2 of those rectangles. Up here are the gussets. You need to make 2 gussets, and it's a 5-inch square. 5-inch square. And then for your sleeves, you need to make 2 sleeves, of course, and they're 17 inches wide by 22 inches long. This is the lightweight linen that we've decided to make Danielle's new shift out of. It's very beautiful, very interesting. I don't know of any other striped shifts, but that's okay. That's just fine. It'll make for a beautiful shift. I measured up from the bottom hem on the front side, 45.5 inches, and made this mark. And this mark is 6 1/4 inches from the outside of the fabric. So from here to here is 6 1/4 inches. On our diagram, what I just did on the fabric was I made a mark 45 1/2 inches from the hem up to the center of the shoulder, and I went in from the edge of the fabric, I went in 6 1/4 inches, and right here I made that mark that I just showed you. Now what I'm going to do is just inside that mark I'm going to attach a piece of blue thread to give me a rather semi-permanent marker of the center of the top of the shift. I'm going to put one here and here. I'm going to make a mark over here at the 32-inch mark point, the 32-inch point. That is the width of the fabric at the shoulder area. I'm going to make that same 32-inch mark at the hem area of the shift, 32 inches. Set the ruler on the edge of the selvage. I'm using the selvages, by the way, in case you're wondering. And we're going to go over here 32 inches and make a mark. I'm using pencil because this linen is a very light color and I can get away with a pencil. I drew a cross mark over there with my pencil to show the intersection of the 32-inch width at the shoulder area and the 32-inch width at the hem area, and that's a 45 1/2 inch distance, so I marked that intersection with my pencil. If I pan back, it's 45 1/2 inches from the hem. I went 32 inches wide and made this mark, and I went toward the shoulders 45 1/2 inches, and I met up with that mark. It's kind of cramped in here at the moment because we have a 40-inch wide weaving loom with a linen warp on it that we have to work around. So this is my point, the intersection between the 32-inch width and the 45 1/2 inch length. This mark here denotes the center of the shoulders. Now we're going to measure 6 1/4 inches from this intersection. We're going to lay our yardstick right on this mark and this mark. I'm going to go 6 1/4 inches, which is right there. Make a mark. Put my yardstick on my two intersections, and this is a cut line. And if you can see it, this is also a cut line. So we're going to be cutting from this line to this line. And between this line and this mark, this is going to be the actual garment at the center of the shoulders, and we're going to have a neck opening right about here, but that comes much later. Now we're going to lay out our gores, or at least where the gores will be. Now it's time to measure up from the bottom of the hem straight up the side of the selvage for a distance of 19 1/2 inches and make a mark. And then from that mark we're going to draw a line that goes up to our 6 1/4 inch mark that we made earlier. And then with this triangle right here, I'll show you what we do with that. It's an interesting lesson in historical sewing. I'm going to use the yardstick as a pointer, and if you can see that mark, and I think you can, I measured up from the hem up 19.5 inches and made a mark. Then from that mark I drew an angled line from that mark all the way up to this point. This is a mark we made earlier. This is a fun geometry lesson, an exercise in geometry. So it leaves us with a triangle. And guess what we're going to use that triangle for? That's going to become one of our gores. Now that waist area is not going to be waist, because now in the 18th century fabric was very seldomly wider than 36 inches. Nowadays we're blessed with fabrics that are anywhere from 42 to 62 inches. But back in the old days they had very narrow fabrics. So this area that would have been cut out and maybe discarded, they would have gotten their gores out of it. So the gore is 5 inches at the base and 19.5 inches for the height. And then so you make a mark, and then you connect the two marks with this line here. We're going to be cutting that out, and that's one of the gores. We're going to do that exact same thing on the other side, and then on the back of the garment. So we'll go ahead and start cutting. Okay, that's one of our gores. We need 4 of them. And we're going to get the other 3 using the same process that we got this one. It's going to be from that cutout here at the sides. Now, just to give you a little bit of a foreknowledge of what's going to happen, that gore is going to be sewn back on. We're going to sew it back on down here to give us those 4 gores that we talked about. You see how they could do that, and they can make their garment wider at the bottom just by using the waist from the cutout. So we'll set this to the side. I took some blue contrasting color thread and I sewed it in the very top center of both shoulders. So I did it here and over here. And that'll come in handy later on when we attach the sleeves. The other thing I did was I put a colored thread in the front, because I need to know which of these 2 panels is the front and which is the back. Now it's all one piece. It's all one piece. In the old days they may have made it out of 2 pieces, but I usually do it out of 1 piece of fabric. And so this is our center of the shoulder, and so this is the front and this is the back. Now let's talk about how to sew on the gores. Here's the gore. There are 4 of these triangles that we call gores. We're going to sew the gore on to the edge of the bottom of the body of the shift, just like that, which will give it an extended shape out here. Because remember, in the old days, 18th century, they may not have had fabric as wide as what we need here. So this is 32 inches. We have 2 of these for both, 1 each on both sides. So that's another 5 times 2 is 10. So 32 times 10 is 42. With modern fabrics, we could have cut it out with 1 piece. But in the old days, and most existing antiques, you would have seen this cut out of scrap. And I showed you doing that. And then you just add that down here. So I'm going to show you how we attach this. Now remember, this is the outside, or we'll call it the good side of the garment. What we're going to do is pin this gore right here. We're going to pin the gore right there. We're going to use about a 1/2 inch seam allowance when we sew this on. So we want to have our pins a little bit more than maybe 5/8 of an inch or so. So we'll pin that in place. Okay, the gore is pinned in place now. After all 4 of the gores are pinned on, we're going to attach, we're going to sew the gore onto the body, right here with about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, right here, and we're going to use back stitches. So we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up to right about to here. Now that all of our pieces are cut out, the first step is sewing on the gores, the 4 gores. So here's one of them that I've taken the time to pin in place. We're going to sew this gore on with about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now, like I said earlier, I don't usually measure that seam allowance. You can, but this is about a 1/2 of an inch right here. Okay, here's our handy little 6-inch ruler, and we're going to use about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So here's the edge of the gore, and here's the 1/2 inch mark. So we would be sewing right about there. And like I said, I usually do it by eye. It doesn't have to be right to the 32nd of an inch. We will be using back stitches to sew this in place. Which is where you go in with your, obviously with your needle. You come back out. I'm trying to keep my hands out of the way of the camera. And then you're going to go back in behind where the thread comes out. And then you're going to exit the fabric again just ahead of where the thread came out. Pull your needle out. That is a back stitch. I'll show another one. We're going to put the needle in behind where the thread came out. You want to make your stitches tight and neat because the stitches are what makes hand sewing so neat and attractive. So there you go. I'll do one more. And then it'll come out right there. Right there. So you can see where the needle goes in behind the thread and it comes out after the thread. We'll pull that needle through. Sorry for the shadow. There we go. I'm just going to go ahead and sew the entire seam. Then we'll come back and we'll flat fill the seam. Our gore is now sewed on. We used those back stitches, like I said, with that 1/2 inch seam allowance, and it's nicely sewed on. Now the next step is to deal with the seam allowances, the raw seam allowances that are on the inside of the garment. And we're going to flat fill these. Now the first step in flat filling is to determine which way you want the flat fill to go. I like making the flat fill on these gores go toward this direction. You see, here's our gore. And instead of going into the body of the garment, I like them going to the gore. So to do this, we're going to take our 2 seam allowances and we're going to cut back the one on the inside. We're going to cut that back down to about half. That removes the seam allowance. The next step is to pin the flat fill in place. We're going to fold the longer seam allowance. We're going to fold it in half over top of the shorter one, like that. I'm working with linen, so linen behaves quite well compared to worsted wool. So I folded it that one time. Now I'm going to fold it again like that, and I'm going to pin that in place. I'm going to do that down the entire length of our seam. We're sewing the flat fill with the back stitch. To do that, we're going to enter the cloth behind where the thread comes out of the cloth. We're going to just poke the tip of our needle in right there. We're going to bend it back and exit the cloth just on the other side of where that thread is, like that. Pull our needle through. We'll do another one, and then I'll show it to you on the inside. Now before I pull that needle out, I'm going to flip this over and show you the flat fill. If you look really closely, you can see just a little bit of the sewing needle right there on that ledge. This is the ledge where we folded the cloth over. Remember, we trimmed one and kept the other one full length, and so we folded the raw edge of the seam over. That little bit of glint, that's our sewing needle. And so that's how you do a flat fill. We're going to use back stitches, and we're going to go down the entire length of the seam in that same manner. All 4 of our gores are now sewn on and flat filled. So we'll set the body of the shift aside and turn our attention now to the sleeves. Each sleeve consists of what I call the barrel of the sleeve, which is 22 inches wide and 17 inches long, and each sleeve will have a wristband attached. And it's going to be a lot of fun to attach that to the sleeve because it'll be stroke gathered, which is a very fun operation to carry out. So this is our wristband, and down here, this little square, which is 5 inches by 5 inches square, is the gusset for the sleeve. We're going to be attaching that first. It's going to be attached simply by laying it on top of the barrel of the sleeve. Even it up. It's going to be sewn to the sleeve. We're going to use back stitches, and eventually we're going to be flat filling. In fact, from here on out, quite a bit of our seams will be flat filled. You're going to be quite proficient at flat filling when you get finished with your shift. Anyway, we're going to sew this on to the barrel of the sleeve right here with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to start a 1/2 inch from this edge in there, and we're going to end a 1/2 inch from that edge, which will give us seam allowances all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and pin the gusset to the sleeve barrel. It's now pinned in place. We're going to put our back stitch right through here, and then this will be folded down. That'll be part of our gusset. And this will be the first of 4 seams on the gusset. You probably don't know what I mean right now, but you will later. We'll be sewing all the way around 4 sides. This is the first side. Over here is the left-hand sleeve, and we'll pan over to here, the one we just pinned. And this is the right-hand sleeve. We're just now closing up this seam for the gusset. We're using a back stitch. We'll just keep back stitching along until we get about a ½ inch from the other end. Just a couple more stitches. Maybe one more stitch. Yep, one more. Very good. Then we'll tie that off, and the gussets will be attached to the sleeves. Very good. This is the shift sleeve assembly. I call it an assembly because we have 3 parts to the sleeve. We have what I call the barrel of the sleeve, the length of the sleeve. We have the gusset, the underarm gusset, and we have the wristband. This is the wristband of the sleeve. When the sleeve attaches to the wristband, when the wristband is sewn onto the sleeve, we use what's called a whip stitch, and we also gather the sleeve, and we use a technique called stroke gathering. If you look closely, you can see these little gathers, and I'm going to show you how we do that. When we attach the sleeve to the shift body, we are also going to use stroke gatherers at that location. And if you look very closely, you will see a parallel set of contrasting color thread, and that is integral to the stroke gather. We're going to be putting those in. After that, we'll put in buttonholes on each end of the wristband. So we're going to cover creating historically accurate 18th century buttonholes using a buttonhole stitch. The first step is to put a little hem where the sleeve placket is. This is called a sleeve placket. Just a very little turned hem, and it's going to be a tapered hem. So down here, where it joins back up to the sleeve, it's going to have a slight taper to it. We'll do that. Then we're just going to use a little whip stitch to hold this seam in place. Actually, it's a hem, not a seam, to hold this hem in place. We'll do that on both sides of the sleeve. I take my small ruler, my 6-inch ruler, and I measure down 4½ inches from the end of the sleeve, and I insert a pin into the fabric as a marker. Then I just roll the fabric over. This is a rolled hem, and I put a couple pins in place, and then I start at one end or the other, and I use a series of whip stitches. This is hard to do to keeping my hands out of the way. I'm going to try to show you how I'm doing this. Just, again, these are whip stitches, so I'm going into the fabric here, and then I'm coming back out, and I'm catching just the edge, of that rolled hem. Just the very edge. You can see the needle coming out right there. So we're going to catch that and pull that through. We're going to do another one. Now, this is what I call a tapered hem, meaning you start normal, but then when you get down toward where it goes back into the sleeve, it kind of tapers out. So I call that a tapered hem. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this hem in place. We'll do that on both sides of the sleeve. I've got the sleeve plackets sewn on now. It's just that little rolled hem, and we measured, like I said, 4.5 inches from the end of the sleeve down to where the placket or the little cuff hem ends. We've got that done on both sides. Now on to the next step. Well, the next step is to get ready for putting the cuff on the sleeve. Here is the cuff on the first sleeve that I did, and you can see how we took that wide fabric and we gathered it up to just occupy this shorter space. We gathered it up. It was 22 inches wide, now it's only 11. So where does all that fabric go? Well, we gather it up, and you can see how it's been gathered. And that's exactly what they call this. This is called a gather in sewing terms. And this particular kind of a gather is called a stroke gather, because when you're setting it up for sewing, you can take the needle and you can just kind of move these little ruffles or gathers around so that they look nice. It's kind of decorative. To set yourself up for doing a stroke gather, you want to get yourself some contrasting color thread, and I like to use a little bit heavier thread, say a 50 weight thread. So that's what this is. This is 50 weight thread, and you can see that it's a contrasting color. We're going to I like to use a little bit longer of a needle to put the thread, to work the thread with, and I'm going to go in the fabric. Remember, this is, well, let me see, the thread will actually stay in there, but we're going to be cutting off the ends. I'll explain that in a minute. I don't want to sew the sleeve to the tablecloth. But we're going to, it's hard to sew on camera because I'm trying to keep my hands out of the picture, or I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to make a running stitch about 1/8 of an inch apart. Try to keep them about the same distance. And we're going to do this down the entire length or width of the sleeve. So we're going to go down the entire length of the sleeve, the entire width, if you will, all the way to the other end, like that. Keep looking. Stay with me. Right down to the other end. Now you'll notice that there's 2 rows of those threads. All the way down to the other side. Now you'll notice that there's 2 rows in parallel, and when we put you do the first row, obviously first, and then you'll follow that up with a second row, and you want to go in and out and in and out in lockstep with the first one, because they're going to work together when I show you that particular step. And where your threads go in, you want to put about 3 or 4 knots in the end of your thread with about maybe a 3-inch tail, and you're going to be using that tail to pull the thread with, and the knots are to keep the thread from going in. I finished the first row of our gather thread, and now I'm installing the second row. And like I said earlier, you want to do the best you can to have the stitches right lockstep with the first row. So here's the first row stitch. I came out of the cloth, and now I'm going to try to go right back in and have them match up as best as you can to within the thread. And then I'm going to poke the tip of the needle down under the cloth, and I'm going to try to have it come out just exactly where it wants to come out. So you see that right there. Well, that could be better. I'm awfully fussy about this. I'm going to pull that out. Now I'm using a longer needle than my regular sewing needle for this job. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I'm hoping to get several stitches on the length of the needle. Now when you do this, you can help yourself by pulling the cloth onto the needle. So let me show you what I mean. We're going to insert the needle. Now I'm going to, with my 2 fingers, I'm going to bend the cloth down right over the tip of the needle. Then I'm going to pull the cloth up and onto the needle like that. Then bend the cloth down and then bend it back up. So the needle is actually doing very little going in and out. It's me putting the cloth on and taking the cloth off of the needle. So I got 3 stitches there, I think, 2 or 3. And I'm just going to keep going at this rate until I get to the very end. And when I get to the very end, I'm going to just tie. I'm going to leave about a 2 or 3 inch tail, and I'm going to tie it off with a nice heavy knot. You see that heavy knot? And that way when I'm ready to gather this fabric up, I'm going to pull both of the 2 threads like this. You see how that's gathering up? It's gathering, and that's what we want to do. But I'm going to put this on first. We have our 2 parallel lines of gathering stitches done. Now remember, these are not going to be seen. They're contrasting color so that we can see them, and they're just for the purpose of scrunching all of the cloth together in a kind of an attractive manner. So what I have learned is that linen will memorize its shape to a degree. Now we can use that to our advantage. What I'm going to do now is remember those little strings that we had left over at the ends of the stroke gather threads. Those little, we had those little bit of excess strings sticking out. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the fabric together along those strings. Here are the 2 strings on this side of the sleeve. So we're going to just take those 2 little strings right there. We're going to use the little overhang or excess to hold on to them with, and we're going to just gather up the fabric along those strings on both sides. We're just going to, it's just going to gather the fabric together, but in a controlled manner, using those strings to hold everything in one nice package. I don't know if you can see that, but there they are. We're going to leave the fabric scrunched up like this overnight, 24 hours or so. And when we come back the next time, it should sort of remember some of that shape. The time has come to begin thinking about buttonholes. We've got the wristband on the shift attached to the one sleeve, and we're about ready to attach the wristband to the other sleeve. So once your wristband is attached, you are ready to put the buttonhole in. I like to put the buttonholes in when the sleeve is off the body of the garment. It's just so much easier to flip this little bit of fabric around while you're sewing the buttonholes, as opposed to when you have an entire garment to have to handle on your work surface. So that's what we're going to do now. I'm going to show you the tools that I use, which are very few, and the procedure that we'll use to go through this. Okay. Well, the first thing we have to do is put a slit opening where the buttonhole will go. And in this case, on this sleeve, we're going to have a buttonhole on both ends of the wristband. So there's going to be one here, and there's going to be one here. The first step is to make the buttonhole opening. Typically, in the 18th century, they would have used a buttonhole chisel. And you can still buy them. William Booth Draper stocks them last I saw. They're a little pricey, but if you do a lot of buttonholes, I feel that they're worth it. I don't do a lot of buttonholes, and so I just use a carpenter's chisel. 3/4 inch would be ideal. I can't locate my 3/4 inch carpenter chisel at the moment, but I did find this 3/8 one, and we'll have to make it do. I like to have a piece of wood, or you could use a magazine to go underneath where you're going to put this buttonhole, so that when you run your chisel through, it'll have something good to go into. It's good to have a hammer or a mallet of some kind to drive the chisel. And it's also good to have a good pair of sharp and sturdy scissors. We're going to be using 60 weight thread. I've been using 100 weight thread so far to construct this shift, but I'm glad I dug deeper in my sewing kit and I found this 60 weight. 50 weight would have been ideal, but I found the 60 weight, and that's what I'm going to go with. So we're going to drive the chisel in the center of the region that you want to put your buttonhole. Now I'm going to be starting in about half the distance of the button that I know will be used. We're not going to be making the buttons for this shift. I usually make buttons for shifts and shirts, but Danielle has some silver sleeve buttons that she uses. So we're just going to make the holes for her. Now, the nice thing about a buttonhole chisel is that it has a bevel on both sides of the blade, whereas a carpenter chisel typically only has a bevel on one side. So with that in mind, we want to just kind of lean the chisel over so that the tip of the chisel will go straight into the fabric. So I think right about there. Take your time with this part. You only get one chance. So I'm going to hold that there. You can probably just push it in if your chisel is sharp. But I'm going to use the mallet and just give it a light tap like this. And then you can take your chisel to extend the length of that buttonhole. I'm going to extend it a little bit more. That should get us started. So now we have a slit opening for our buttonhole. You can take your sharp scissors and you can extend it a little bit farther if you feel you need to. I think this one is just about right. I think it's just about right. So there's our buttonhole opening. I think I'll just enlarge it just a tiny little bit. Like that. Now, having said that, in the old days, and you can probably still find antiques, they have a special scissor that is made for cutting the procedure that I just did. I wanted to take a minute to show you that for nice tailoring projects, they do make a thread called silk thread. We also call it buttonhole twist. It comes in many different colors, and this is the type of thing that I will use to sew buttonholes. when I'm doing a nice tailoring project. The other thing I want to show you was before you start sewing, make sure you run your thread on your needle through beeswax about 3 times. This helps to keep it from tangling. Okay, I think we're ready to start sewing now. I'll be working from the outside of the garment. So in the case of this particular buttonhole, it's right up next to a sleeve placket, a wrist placket, which is right here. And that's how you can tell which is the good side or the so-called back side of the garment. So we want to work from the good side. What I like to do is I like to enter the fabric from, I call it the field. So I'll go in right about here. Okay, enter the needle there. And then I'm going to bring the needle through the buttonhole like that. I'm going to pull the needle and thread through. But I'm going to leave about 1.5 inches. I don't know, there's no set rule, but I leave about this much of a tail. That's about 1.5 inches. I leave that tail sticking out. Then I'm going to grab my needle and I'm going to start right here on this end, and I'm going to start on this side. So I'm going to grab my needle, try to stay out of the way of the camera. I'm going to insert the needle through the buttonhole. Now, caution, when you do this, make sure that it goes through the buttonhole and it's clear of any errant threads. Alright, now we're going to tip that fabric up and we're going to exit again the fabric right about that much, however much of a distance that is. That might be 1/8 of an inch. I'm counting about 5 or so warp threads that go this way in the cloth. Now, whatever you do for a distance, make sure you maintain that distance down the length of the buttonhole. Now, look at this. We almost have a free ride here because you can see the stripes in the cloth. We can almost keep our needle right on that where it goes from one color to the other color of that stripe. Okay, so we're going to pull our needle through, but not all the way. We're going to leave that little bit of a loop and we're going to return our needle through that loop, and we're going to work very gently, and we're going to pull our thread very gently and bring that. It's going to cause that little loop to snuggle up right there against where we cut the buttonhole slit open. So you can see that little knot is right there. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. That is the knot we're going to use, or stitch you could say. So now we're going to put a second one in, right next to the first. Remember, don't catch any errant threads, and poke the tip of that needle out right on that line I showed you. Or if you don't have a stripe, you can just observe which thread of the warp it is. Okay, now we want to be pretty close to the other one, but it doesn't have to be snuggled really close to it. What does that mean? You don't know what I mean by that, but I would tell you that making buttonholes, hand sewing buttonholes, takes a lot of practice. I usually practice on a piece of scrap because I don't make many buttonholes. Okay, we're going to go through that loop like that, and we're going to pull our thread through like this, and we're going to snuggle that little loop up against the side of the buttonhole opening like that. I'm doing my best to keep my hands out of the light and keep them out of the camera. Okay, there's two. Now, another tip that I try to keep in mind is when I'm sewing, and if I'm doing a really long seam or whatever, I can move it along and have a lot of fun and pretty much do it absent-mindedly. But when it comes to buttonholes, people will almost judge you on your buttonholes. And so you want to just take your time and enjoy the process. I say that about a lot of the things I do. But you want to be as neat and as accurate as you can be. We're going to pull that through. And we're going to leave that loop open. And we're going to put the needle through it. And we're going to pull that through. That's really all there is to it. But the key to making this look good is to go slow, take your time. I have had accidents happen. And if I have one happen, I will take the time to come back to the camera and show you. And then I can show you how we can correct the problem, because problems do happen. I'll do one more on camera, and then I'm going to go over to my comfortable chair, and I'm going to do quite a few of these. Okay, now the last one I did wasn't quite right where I wanted the needle to come out. It was in about a thread or so. Maybe, I don't know if the camera can pick that up, that, I want to improve on that. So I think I'm better with this one. I'm going to pull that out. And remember, leave that loop, because we're going to put our needle through that loop, pull it through, and we're going to close that loop right down against the side of the buttonhole. So that's it so far. We've gotten down to the end of the one side. I can do maybe one more stitch. And I wanted to show you something. I showed you one way to make the buttonhole stitch. I want to show you another way. Some people do it the way I showed you first. Some people do it the way I'm going to show you now. So again, you poke the needle through the same way. And then instead of pulling the needle through and then putting the needle through the little loop at the end, take the thread that comes off of the project and just wrap it around the needle going clockwise like that. Maybe you can see that little loop there. That becomes your loop. Now you're going to pull the needle through, and I want to show you another trick. Pull the thread through very carefully and slowly, and stop when you get to have a little loop about that big. Then take two fingers and just lightly pull that little loop, because sometimes you'll have it inside where it's bunching up, and if you just stop and pull that little loop, that'll straighten it out for you. Then you can go ahead and pull the buttonhole stitch up alongside the buttonhole opening. Okay, Now, anyway, we did that one side. Now, what we like to do here is we're going to put in a bit of a bar tack. So sometimes these come out nice, sometimes they don't. We're going to go in with our needle. Right there, it's going to be at about the same level as the end of our buttonhole. But we're going to have it go in out from the buttonhole opening a little bit farther than usual. Just a little bit, maybe the width of a thread or two. We're going to reach under with that needle and we're going to come out just past our line of buttonhole stitches right there. Just a little bit past. So we're going to pull the needle on through carefully. We're going to go back and go through that first hole again and come out the second hole. Like that. We're going to do this 3 times. So that's 1. Now this is called a bar tack and it's used to, you want to stop the spread of the buttonhole opening. In other words, you don't want it to tear. You don't want it to tear open anymore. I'm not happy with how the needle looks, so I'm being quite fussy. People will judge you on your buttonholes. I'm taking my time. There we go. That's better. I'm going to do it one more time. One more time, and then we'll finish this off. There we go. Pull that through. There. Now, what we do is we're going to put a series of buttonhole stitches down this way. Down this way. So we can probably get about 5 or 6 of them. We're going to try to gather. We're going to try to go underneath all of those bar tack threads we just put in with our needle. We're going to wrap the thread around the needle like I showed you. Pull the needle through. This is just the regular buttonhole stitch. Leave that little loop and then tug on that little loop like that. And we're going to snuggle it up, except this time I want the knob of the stitch to rest on top of this little ridge of threads. Over here we had the knob rest on the inside. Over here it's going to be on the top. You probably don't know what I mean, but that's the best I can do to explain it. I'm going to do it again. We're going to get about 5 or 6 of these on the top, and it looks really nice when you get it to come out right. Again, I don't do many buttonholes. I only make about 3 or 4 sewing projects during the winter. That's all I have time for. So I can't really get good at anything. But anyway, wrap that thread around, pull it through, stop when there's just a little bit of a loop left. I'm glad I did it there. And we're going to pull it through like that. So we're going to continue on this way. Wrap that thread around the needle. Be very careful. Go very slowly, because you can easily get a knot or a snag or a tangle. Is that the right word? Pull that loop through. Tug that up. It's looking good so far. We didn't screw it up yet. I can probably get 3 more of these on here. I was going to make a practice piece, but I figured I would just go ahead and do it on the project. You can get about 2 more of these on here. Slowly pull that through, very slowly. Maybe 1 more. That looks really nice. Sometimes they didn't do this. Sometimes they just continued their buttonhole stitch right around the end and just keep going around the circle and just continue on back. You would see that a lot also. That's a different style. But I like this one. Okay, that's good. Now we're going to poke our needle through that hole, bring it in. This is hard to do. I'm trying not to okay, we're going to come out. And then we're going to just continue down this side with the same buttonhole stitches that we did this side. So I'll catch up to the camera when I get down toward the end. This side is the one we're working on. We've got the stitches down this other side now. I'm doing the last one at the moment. So we'll go ahead and pull that, before we pull the needle through, we'll wrap that thread around it. And we're going to slowly and carefully pull the thread through. Give that little loop a slight little gentle tug, and then pull that knot home. Now all we have to do is do that bar tack procedure like we did down here. We'll do it up here. So again, we go through just past the buttonhole stitches on the first side, and then we come out again just past the stitches on the side, on the second side, the one we just did. So we're going to do that 3 times. We'll try to go in through the same hole, and then 1 more. That's the bar tack. Now we're going to do that series of buttonhole stitches that covers the bar tack. Here we go. I like to leave that little loop, and I like to get into the habit of just giving a slight little gentle tug before I pull the thread through. There we go. And we'll do a few more of these, and I'll show you what to do with the thread when we're finished. Oh, I forgot to wrap the thread around the needle, so I have to do it this way. It's really not much difference, if any. So usually if you make a mistake of some kind, if you just take the time to think about it, you can probably find a way to back out or come up with a solution. Okay, this time I'll remember. Put the thread around the needle, pull the needle through, give that little loop a tug, let it nestle on top. Some people actually, when they go through the bar tack, they also try to grab a thread of the fabric. That's not a bad idea. Whoops. I think if I lived in the 18th century, being a seamstress or a mantua maker would have been kind of fun. That probably would have been my calling. Or a spinster. I probably would have been a spinster. I think we'll do it one more time. One more time right there. We have a little bit of room left on the end of that bar tack. Whoops. Okay. Give that loop a gentle little tug. There we go. Now, it's not the best buttonhole I've ever done. It's not the worst either. Looks like down here, this could have been a little bit straighter. I like to assess my job and see how well I did. Now we're going to get rid of the thread. We're going to just go back in. We're going to go back in, pull the needle through. Then we're going to flip this over, and on the back side, hopefully we're still in the camera view. On the back side, we're going to just run our needle down through the back side of the buttonhole stitches. Hopefully you can still see it. Do that a 2 or 3 times. No need to tie it. Okay, now we can cut that off. I hope you can see this. Ah, darn. I'm trying to keep the light on it, and I'm trying to keep it in the camera. We'll cut that off. And then on the good side, we have this thread that we started with. We'll cut that off. And that's it. That is our buttonhole stitch. Not the best one I've ever done, not the worst one. We still have 3 more to go on this project. You can see the little buttonhole stitches that I put over top of the bar tacks. And it turned out okay. I'm not especially proud of it, but it'll work fine. We have 3 more to go, and then when we're done, we'll assess all 4. So now that we have this buttonhole done, I'm going to do this one, attach the wristband on the other sleeve, put those buttonholes on, and then we're going to attach the sleeves to the body. It's time to put the other wristband on now. You'll notice that I have the quarters marked. In other words, I've got a center, and then I've marked the quarters. I call them the quarters with pins. I've also put a pin on the very ends of the wristband to hold the little overturned seam in place on each end. On the sleeve itself, I've marked the quarters with contrasting thread. I've got a center thread, and then I've got a thread over on the right hand side quarter and a thread over on the left hand side quarter. What we're going to do here is pin the wristband, or you can call it the cuff. We're going to pin it in place. Now you'll notice that we have our gathering threads that are holding our gathers nice and scrunched up. So we're going to just cover those contrasting color gathering threads. You see how I've just barely covered them right there. So this is the center pin, and this is the center thread. I'm going to take this pin out. This is how I do it. You can just get another pin if you want, but I'm going to use that pin since it's there and it's handy. And I'm going to go ahead and pin the center in place, just like that. I'm going to do the same thing over on the right hand side. Just going to barely cover our threads, our gather threads, like that. And then we're going to take this pin and pin the wristband in place. You can call it the cuff if you want to. And then while I'm over here on the right, I'm going to go ahead and pin the right hand side of the cuff to the sleeve. This is the sleeve placket that we hemmed before. So this is the good side of the fabric. I'm going to take that pin out of there, pin that in place. Pin it in place, just like that. There we go. Now we're going to go over and do the same thing on the left hand side. This is our quarter thread. Right here is our quarter thread. And here's our quarter pin. I'm just going to barely cover those threads, those gathering threads. Just barely cover them and pin that in place. Sorry that my hands are in the way. That's a problem. It's been a problem of mine trying to photograph sewing. So there's that. And then we're going to go over here to the left and we're going to pin the far left hand side. I'm just calling it the left hand side. We're going to pin that in place. Pin it in place. There we go. That's the first step. Now for the next step, you're going to be taking some of your pins. I've got my pin collection here. Just to show you something interesting, if you want to become a hand sewer, this is really all the tools you need. You need thread, of course. You need a thimble. Well, you don't need a thimble. I like to use a thimble. And a ball of wax. And probably a needle would be good. I don't have good eyes, so I use my needle threader. That's really all you need to get started. Maybe a good pair of scissors. Now we're going to insert a pin at the midway points. Now, as you start sewing, you can move these pins around, and you can move your gathers around to just kind of adjust things as you go. I've come a little closer with the camera. I'm hoping that I'm on the camera. So here we are. So now we're pinning in between the quarter pins. And we'll put one down here. Put one down here. Take a pin. I always keep getting my needle. We're going to put a pin here. And I think one more. Down here. We'll put a pin in right here. In between these two quarters. The beginning and the first quarter. We'll put a pin in there. Just like that. That's the next step. Now for the third step, we're going to begin sewing the wristband on the sleeve now. If you need more pins, it's up to you. But if you feel as though you need more pins to hold that wristband in place, feel free to grab one and put it in there. I'm going to. And it's the same process. Just want to barely cover the gather thread. Put that pin in there. Now we can start sewing. We'll take our needle and thread. Going to come in from the back side. Like this. You want to come in near the end of the wristband, as close as you can get. And you're going to pull that thread through. Now, we're going to be using a whip stitch. With that in mind, you want to go in the sleeve. Go in the sleeve. We did slip stitches already. No, is that right? Slip stitch? Whip stitch. Yeah, I knew that was wrong. This is a whip stitch. I'm going to move my needle down here a little bit. Now, you notice I'm taking the tip. I said needle. I meant to say pin. You notice I'm taking the tip and I'm moving my gathers around because they are a decorative feature. So I'm moving them around with the tip. And I'm kind of stroking them in place. You see how I'm stroking my gathers into a good, pretty place? That's why they call this type of a gather a stroke gather. That's the reason for it. So I'm going to go ahead and put that pin in there and grab my needle and come back in. Just like that. We're going to go right down the line. I think we've already talked about whip stitches, so I don't have to be too instructive about it at this point. You're going to go in on the sleeve portion, and you're going to just pick up the lower edge of that cuff or band. Some people call it a band because it's so narrow. You want to catch it by about 2 or 3 threads, warp threads, and then you're going to take that needle and pull your threads through, and you're just going to keep going in this fashion all the way down the line, just like that. I'm going to go sit next to the wood stove where it's nice and comfortable, and I'm just going to enjoy this sewing. Okay, so we'll pick it up later. The sleeve assemblies are finished. Yay! I finished them by putting the wristbands in place. Nowadays we call these the cuffs. In the 18th century, wristbands were very narrow, whereas starting in the first half of the 19th century, wristbands became cuffs and they were much wider. So we've got them on, and you'll notice the nice stroke gathers, which serves two purposes. It gathers up the cloth to fit into this space, number one, and number two, it adds a decorative element. We've got the buttonholes finished on both of the sleeve bands, wristbands, and they turned out rather nice. Buttonholes are all done by hand, and so sometimes some are better than others. It's just a hand work kind of a thing. The next step is to attach the sleeves to the body of the shift. And this is the end of the sleeve that gets attached to the body of the shift. And so in preparation for that operation, we've divided our sleeve into quarters. It looks like I have to put another one here, if you can see my finger. That's no problem. But this is the halfway point. This is the other quarter. And it looks like I have to put the quarters on this sleeve end. Otherwise, once they're in, then we're going to, just like on the wrist, we're going to grab these 2 threads. That's why I left the end a little bit long. We're going to grab those and we're going to pull them tight and let them sit overnight, because linen will memorize its shape somewhat. So we'll scrunch those up. That's called a gather. We're gathering the cloth up. And so we'll do that after we get our other quarter marks in. Now that the sleeves are finished being built, I guess you could say, or made, it's time to attach the sleeve to the body of the shift. So this is the end that gets attached right here. We have to sew this end to this edge, top edge of the shift. I've already done the one side and it turned out pretty good. I still have to flat fill the seams inside, but it's attached. Give you an idea what it looks like. This is the gusset on the bottom of the sleeve. I like those gussets. I'm supposed to use this one for the top dead center. So let me go ahead and insert that in there. And we'll pin that in place. We're going to put this pin where this seam is. We'll pin that in place right there. I have to pull this back together a little bit. I have to get my gathers back together. What a mess I made. We're going to put a pin right here. I want to put a pin at all of these quarter marks. So I've got a pin at the seam allowance. I've got a pin at this quarter mark. I've got it pinned at this, you could call it a quarter mark. This marker thread is supposed to line up with this one. And then I need one down on this end. So I need to measure down 6 inches. This is one of the more difficult parts of making a shift or a shirt, is getting all this to come out right. So it's worth it to take your time. Just take your time. I've never done it on camera before that I know of. So I've measured down 6 inches. I've measured down from the top dead center of the shoulder. I've measured down 6 inches, and I've put a pin to mark at 6 inches. So we can set our ruler aside now. And make sure that this fabric is folded under, at least this far. Not too bad. This is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now we're going to pin the shoulder, or the sleeve I meant to say. We're going to pin that to the body of the garment with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So here is, well, we have a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the body, and then we need to leave a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the sleeve. So we'll pin it right about there. That's where we will put our pin. Sorry, I know my hands are covering, but I can't help it. I'll show it to you after I get it pinned. There. So that's pinned now. Now I still need to put a pin where this marker thread is, where I need to pin the sleeve to the body where this marker thread is. So I'm going to, I probably should have had marker threads on the body down here and down here. I'm just going to lay that there and pin it. Pin that in place. We're trying to do two things. We're trying to gather up 22 inches wide of fabric into this one space. And so we're trying to accomplish that. We're also trying to do it in a way that we have these attractive stroke gathers. So that's what we're trying to do here. I'm going to take a minute and just I'm going to take an extra minute before I begin sewing, and I'm going to just neaten things up a little bit here, because they got kind of out of whack. So I'm just going to take a minute to do that. I'm going to just put a couple more pins in. Okay, and I'm going to put one more pin here, and then we should be ready to start sewing. Before I forget, I want to pin the gusset. This is the gusset. Remember that little 5 inch or whatever it is square of fabric? This is called the gusset, the underarm gusset, and I want to make sure that I get it pinned. So we want to fold that fabric over again. And we're going to pin the body to the gusset. There. I'm going to cheat and stick my hand underneath. Get that pin in there. I'll put one more in over here. by putting my hand underneath, that's how I'd be doing it if I were not on camera. But I'm trying my hardest to work and keep my hands out of the way so that you can see. That's the hard part. Okay. Now we've got the sleeve pinned to the body. I'm just zooming back out. Our sleeve is pinned to the body. We'll probably put some, once I get settled in the chair to begin sewing, I'm going to be refining my gathers. This exercise was just to get the sleeve attached to the body more or less where it needs to be. But as I start sewing along, I'm going to make adjustments and I'm going to add extra pins. As far as sewing goes, I'm going to begin on this end, which is the front of the garment. And I'm going to begin a 1/2 inch in so that I will have a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the sleeve, a 1/2 inch in, and I'm going to use a whip stitch to get those stroke gatherers to look nice, and I'm going to rearrange them as I go. I'm going to use a whip stitch until I get all the way down to the gusset. When I get to the gusset, I'm going to switch over to a back stitch because we need a lot of strength here. Let me show it to you on the other sleeve that I already did. This is the sleeve I already did. This is the gusset, and this is the bottom of the gusset, the bottom point of the gusset, and this becomes the side seam. But I used a back stitch here on the gusset until I got to where the gathers begin. And then I went all the way over and attached the sleeve with the gathers. I attached those sleeves with a whip stitch. That's what I'll be doing now. It's time now to close up the sleeves and to begin closing up the body. To close up the sleeves, I actually got ahead of myself a little bit, so I had to stop to bring you up to speed here. To close up these sleeves, now we turn the garment inside out, so this is actually the inside and this is the outside good side. So to close this up, you're going to line up the wrist plackets like that. This is the wristband. Line them up, and then you are going to put a pin right here, and you want to observe a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've already put the seam in to make it easier to show you, but you want to have that 1/2 inch seam allowance sticking up like you see here. This is a part that I haven't sewn yet. I wanted to leave it up for you. This is the 1/2 inch seam allowance, and so you're going to put pins in along this seam with the seam allowance sticking up. And after you've pinned it, I like to pin and go past the gusset up to the shoulder, this entire length. Treat that as one seam. And then you're going to start here and you're going to use a back stitch. You're going to back stitch this closed all the way up into the gusset and up to the shoulder. Now let me show you the gusset. Here's the gusset, and you can see I've already sewn this closed. And then you're going to pin the gusset all the way around. If you want to make it easier for yourself, you can do one side at a time. There's 4 sides. So here's another side that's pinned. And then you're going to just use that back stitch all the way around the gusset with that 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then after you've got this closed up with the back stitch, then you can flat fell. Now we've talked about flat felling already, where you basically take you've got your 2 seam allowances sticking up. On this gusset, I like to flat fell toward the center of the gusset. So you're going to flat fell in this direction, like I did here. So to flat fell, you're going to trim the inside seam allowance, and then you're going to fold the outside, the other side of the seam allowance, you're going to fold that over. You're going to pin it in place like I've done here. And then you're going to use a back stitch, but you're going to do this from the outside, so you'll have to turn your sleeve back side, good side out again, so that you can sew it. Now here are the pins. You probably can't see them very well, but here's the pins. And so you're going to be sewing from the outside. Remember, we talked about this, where you put your finger in and you can feel that flat fell with your fingertip. So you're going to do that all the way around the gusset, all the way around, flat fell. So you're going to be flat felling, you're going to be closing up and then flat felling this entire seam. You're going to go all the way up and around the gusset, go up to the shoulder, to the body, and then go all the way around the gusset. And then after that we'll start to close up the side. The gusset is now flat felled. This is the square gusset. It's flat felled. And now the next step is to begin closing up the side of the garment. I wait until now to close it up because I need to be able to get my hand in the open side to help me with flat filling the gusset. But now that that's finished, our next step is to close up the side. So to do that, we have the garment inside out. And this is the side seam. This is the side seam, and we are pinning it down the length. You can see possibly the pins. Now we get to just sit back and relax and enjoy some hand sewing. Not that the rest of it wasn't hand sewing, but what I mean is this is fairly simple. And we can actually listen to a podcast at this point. We're just using a back stitch. We've been talking about those, so I don't have to tell you. And we're using about 1/2 inch of a seam allowance. So we're going to just back stitch our way down the entire length of the side. And you can see my pins. I have the pins set a little bit wider than 1/2 inch to give myself room. And what I like to do is, when I remove a pin, I like to leapfrog it down to an area that could use a pin. Or if you don't need one, you can just put it away. So we're just back stitching our way down. This is very pleasant. I'm sewing. It's very quiet. I'm listening to the rain outside. I've got coffee. I'm sitting next to the wood stove. This is very enjoyable. I'm going to remove, I've stitched up to this point. I'm going to remove this pin and leapfrog it down the line. Find a place that could use a pin. And I just keep sewing. The side seam, the back stitch side seam is done all the way down. So what I'm talking about is from the bottom of the armpit where the gusset is all the way down to the bottom hem. It's all in. Now we have to flat fill it. So to flat fill, we have our seam allowances. These are the 2 seam allowances, and this is the seam, the back stitch seam that we just sewed all the way down to the hem. Now to flat fill, we take the 1 seam allowance, whichever one you want. I prefer to use the one on the right hand side because I'm right-handed, and I'll be using the scissors in my right hand. So you can see that I've started to trim that seam allowance, maybe at least halfway, if not a little bit more than halfway. So you just want to come in with your scissors. You can cut it either here, or you can cut it from this side. You don't want to cut on your seam. You want to be about halfway between the edge of the seam allowance and the seam, the sewn seam, either halfway or a little bit farther than halfway. So we just cut along there. You would cut all the way down. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to show you how I sew that flat fell. I trimmed this much. What I need to do is get my hand inside. That means you have to find an opening. I'm going to come in through the neck opening. I haven't actually made the neck opening yet, but I did poke a hole through it. Okay, now I've got my hand inside, my left hand that is, and my right hand on the outside so that I can sew. You're going to fold the taller seam allowance in half. We went over this also in the petticoat video, if you saw that. If you didn't see it, you can go back to that. It's if you want to see it from a different angle perhaps. So that's what I've just done. I've just folded that in half and I'm going to pin it. And then we need to do this down the entire length, but I usually do it in sections. We're going to fold the longer seam allowance down over top of the shorter seam allowance. So we'd like to actually wrap that shorter piece with the longer piece. We're going to try to wrap it around that shorter piece. It seems difficult, but once you've done it, it's not that hard. So you can see perhaps that I've wrapped that short piece with the longer piece. I've just wrapped it around, and what that does is to help keep it from fraying. And now I'm going to pin that piece down like that, and also back here. I'm going to put a pin right here like that. So we've got this much pinned. Now to sew it, normally I would just set up a long length of the seam to be flat felled, but so that I can show you, I'm going to go ahead and turn this around or turn it right side out, and we'll show you how to sew it. You want to sew it from the outside of the garment. Alright, I've got my hand in from the bottom and I've gathered up from the hem pretty much the entire length of the shift. Now here is what we're going to sew, but we're going to sew it from the outside. I'm going to go ahead and poke my needle through at the beginning right there. Now we're going to turn that around and pick up that needle right there. There's the needle. So there is the flat fell from the outside with the needle poking through. Here's the needle coming through. Now we're going to be using a back stitch. So and now on the inside, what you don't see happening is I've got my middle finger right here and my thumb is right here, so it's kind of holding that seam together. So on the inside there's my middle finger holding it together. And what I want to do now is remove that first pin, which I'll do now. You have to pretty much do it from the inside. So I'm going to remove that first pin so that I can sew. And here we are. Here's our needle. We're holding the seam closed. We're going to be using a back stitch. Now we're using that middle finger not only to help hold the seam, the flat fell seam closed, but it's also helping us to feel the edge of that flat fell because we want to sew through where the fold is. We're going to just go along with back stitches. This is a lot of fabric to work with, makes it a little bit on the difficult side. A lot of fabric to manage. So turn it over again to see how we're doing. And it looks like we're right on mark. Right on mark, right here. So that's how we do a flat fill. And we're going to do this down the entire length from underneath that armpit all the way down to the hem. Now as we get closer to the hem, I won't have as much fabric here that I have to hold, because in my left hand I'm actually holding the entire shift from hem all the way up to under the armpit. But as we get farther down to the hem, there'll be less and less fabric to hold on to. So that's what we're up against. I'll see you when we get down at the hem. The side seams are finished and they are flat filled the way I showed you. And now we're turning our attention, after much deliberation on the size, because these shifts, the openings for the head, can be very problematic. But anyway, we have come up with a size, and we've cut the opening of the neck opening. We've cut that, and so now it's time to hem it. So to hem it, I'm using a rolled hem, and pin the hem, and now we are sewing the hem of the neckline with very tiny back stitches, so tiny that you can barely see them. And this is very enjoyable work. So I've got it pinned, and I'm going to, you have to remove a pin periodically, like that. And we are just hemming the neck opening in that manner, all the way around. Well, I managed to finish the neckline. It's not that bad, just goes around. Necklines are very fussy on these shifts because as much as you try, it seems as though we always make them a wee bit too big, and then next thing you know the shoulder falls off. So Danielle and I had quite a debate over that, but we think we resolved the issue. So the neckline is done, and now we're turning our attention to the hem. The hem is a long way around, but it's very enjoyable sewing. It's very easy. We're using basically it's kind of like a rolled hem, except I fold it. So I fold it over, and then I use my back stitch. I think it looks good. And what I do is I take my pins and I pin quite a section, and then I just go ahead and sew. Next thing you know, you're halfway around. So we're just going to keep going in that manner. We'll go ahead and finish the hem now. Sometimes on sleeves, at the sleeve placket, I like to put this little design element in. It's a little bit like a bar tack in that it helps to hold the sides of the sleeve from expanding and tearing. But it's somewhat of a design, and I've seen examples on a few of the 18th century antiques. And so we're going to do that. I've done one already, so I'm saving the other one to show the camera. To make one of those little elements, you take a piece of your fabric and you cut it out about 1.5 inches square. And then you're going to fold over all of the edges about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch. Now this is linen, so it does fold. So we're going to fold it like that. And I like to take a pin and pin that fold like that. Then I'm going to do the other side. I'm going to do this to all 4 sides. We're going to make a smaller square out of it. We've got all 4 sides folded and pinned now. Now we're going to remove 2 of these pins, but we're going to use our fingers to hold the bend closed, and we're going to fold any of the corners. I'm going to take this one, and we're going to bend that corner over like this, and we're going to pin that fold. We're going to pin it bent over like that. So there we have it. All we have to do is pin it and sew it to the garment. Here is the sleeve that we're going to sew this onto. I'm going to locate it right there, and I'm going to pin that right in place. Now, by the way, this little design element is entirely optional because not all of the 18th century shifts and shirts had these. So I'm just pinning this design to the shirt like that. Now it's all set to be sewn. I'm going to grab a needle and thread, and I'm going to use a back stitch all the way around. So we're just using back stitches, going all the way around, getting very close to the edge. So we've just gone around this little, I don't know what they're called, a little patch or an applique or whatever.
Placket.
Yep. And so we're going all the way around with these little miniature back stitches. And like I said, you didn't see too many of this type of embellishment. You saw it more on men's shirts than you did women's shifts, but it's a nice little touch that we like to do.
I think it strengthens an area that might get some stress.
Yes. All right, this is the last stitch, and I'll just tie it off now. We just have one step to go, and then the shift will be finished. Now, this is a seam where the sleeve connects to the body at the shoulder. As you can see, the seam is rough, it's unfinished. And we can't really flat fill it very well. Now, in our earlier days of making these shifts, we would just kind of fudge it over, but it wasn't very good. We did some more research and found the solution to this and found what they did in the old days. This is the other sleeve, and I already accomplished the fix for that problem. That seam allowance where the sleeve connects to the body is under this narrow piece of fabric. We call this a shoulder strap, for lack of a better term, and it goes from the bottom of the armpit, it goes up and over the top and comes back around and connects again under the armpit, and we sew that in place. This piece of fabric is going to be the strap. To make this piece of fabric, you cut a piece of fabric 1.5 inches wide and 24 inches long. Then on the back of the strap, you're going to fold over about between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. Between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. You're going to fold it over on each edge. If you have access to an iron and an ironing board, I recommend ironing those edges over. Then the next thing I want you to do is fold this 24-inch strap in half and mark the center with a pin. Then we're going to go over to the garment. It's going to be inside out at that sleeve. Now, if you remember way back when we attached the sleeve to the body, we put marking threads of a contrasting color at the top center of both the sleeve and the body. I don't know if you can see those. Sleeve and body, those are the threads. We're going to take this strap and we're going to, with that pin as the center, we're going to line it up with those center marks. And we're going to just cover that seam of the sleeve where it attaches to the body. We're going to cover it up with this fabric. You see how I've covered it. Then we're going to take this pin and we're going to pin the strap in place. Very good. You're going to cover the stroke gather of the contrasting color. You see that color, that contrasting color is a blue. You want to cover that up like this. You see how I've covered it up? So you want to cover that up, and then we want to take a pin, and I'm going to pin about every inch, 1.25 inches. So I'm going to put a pin there. Now I'm going to be pinning this all of the way around. I'll put another one in, but then I'll do the rest of the pinning off camera, because I think you've got the idea. I'll put another pin in. Now these pins are shaded toward the seam. Now I'm going to tell you that when we sew this in place, we're going to turn the sleeve back right side out so that we can sew it in place. You can see the pin. We're going to be sewing that strap from the good side of the garment with little back stitches from the outside. And you're going to have to feel inside where the strap is so that you can tell where to do your sewing. And your stitch is going to be just inboard of the edge of that seam. And you're going to go all the way around the sleeve so that this entire strap is sewn in place. When the strap ends meet down here, this is the armpit area. This is the gusset that we put in. You can see the gusset. The straps are going to, each end, are going to meet at the bottom of this gusset right here. And on the other shoulder, I cut the strap on an angle like this. And then when the other one came around, I cut it on an angle also so that they met really nicely. This is the sleeve I've already done. I wanted to turn it back inside out to show you what I meant by the two ends of the strap coming together and meeting. And you can see how I've cut them on the angle. This is one piece, this is the other piece. I've cut them on an angle. Now, I'll tell you that this is just my idea. I think that in the 18th century, it's hard to tell exactly. I've only seen them from the outside of the garment, so I don't know for sure exactly what's taking place on the inside. This is the first one that I've done like this, where I've cut it on an angle. I've made a lot of men's shirts that have this strap, and I've made several shifts that have this strap. And this is the first one I've done this with. Usually I just stop or terminate the strap right here at the bottom of this gusset. I just stop right here on each side and call it good. This is the first one I've done this with. So I'll leave that up to you. But also don't forget that we have not been putting these straps on shifts until recently. We've only done a few. And this is, I think, the second for Danielle that we've done a shoulder straps on. I think I have one. So we're doing this from now on because the shoulder area of these shifts, because they're made of such lightweight fabric, they become damaged, and they always need repair, and they always need repair in this region. So we feel that these straps are a good idea. This is our stitch line. Again, we're making these back stitches from the good side of the fabric, the good side of the garment. And again, these are back stitches. Now, just a reminder, I don't know if you can see that, but this, I'm touching my other finger on my left hand. I've got it inside the sleeve so that I can feel that strap. Let me turn this over and show you the strap from the inside. That's the strap. Now, my stitch line is right through here. In fact, if you can see that glint, that's my sewing needle. And that's where I'm making my series of stitches. And I only have to go that far. But again, I'm sewing from the outside. I call this blind sewing. So I just have a few more stitches to make. And I'm trying to get my stitch close to the edge of that strap. And I only have to go down as far as that pin. I put that pin in to mark the limit of where I need to go. And I just thought I would just do these last few stitches here. And then guess what? The garment, the project will be done. Except this is for Danielle, and she likes to do a cross stitch kind of a putting the initials of the owner of the garment. She likes to put those on our shifts, and that's a great idea because when the wash is being done, that's the only way you can pretty much tell whose is whose. And we also like to put the date on our clothing items, especially clothing items that we both wear that are the same, like caps and shifts and so forth. We like to put the date that we sewed them and our initials. So I think I only have one more stitch to make where this pin is, and that'll be it. This has taken about 4 weeks of part-time work. Very relaxing. We usually do our sewing in the evening with tea. And I'm just going to pass my needle through to the inside one last time and then turn it over and grab that needle. And I'm going to tie it off. Just give it a couple of half hitch knots right there. And then it'll be done. This shift is made out of linen. This is the type of thing that your great-grandparents probably used for underwear. Most of the Amish and Mennonite women wear shifts like this for their underwear. And again, this was worn in the 18th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. And again, they're usually made out of linen, although probably in the 19th century, cotton would have come into use. And this is the last little tie-off knot. we can just cut that thread off. And voila, it's all finished. There's the shift, it's all finished. And I think it turned out really nice. Danielle liked this fabric. We had this fabric laying around for quite a while, and I'm thinking I'd like to use it for something, so I asked her if she wouldn't want a shift made out of it. She says, yeah, I like that. So that's what we did. It's 100% Irish linen, and we got it from Burnley and Trowbridge. And yeah, it only took two yards of fabric if you want to make one of these things. I think it was just 2 yards, maybe 2 1/4 you better get. 2 1/4 yards of fabric. And you saw in the video that we did our buttonholes. Danielle has little sleeve buttons that she puts in there, silver sleeve buttons. And yeah, that's about it. Danielle's going to come through and cross stitch her initials right in through here, and she does that on all of our shifts. And then at the very bottom, in one of these gussets, she's also, gores actually they're called, she's also going to cross stitch the date, the year, 2026. And so, okay, so that's about it. On to the next project. Thanks for watching.